Good morning, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to be back home. And if ever we needed a demonstration of just how far we have come, just look around this hall this morning. There must be almost 1,000 smart, well-educated, professional, talented, and gorgeous women in this room, and a few good men too. I wonder what would our grandmothers think as they looked around this room. My grandmother used to use words like manageress and poetess and other such qualifiers, extinct today. When I was a student, I used to go help them out on Sundays, and she used to ask me to run errands, and when I'd go into a government office to look after some paperwork or something for them, she'd always, as I left, say, "Be sure to talk to a man," by which she meant speak to someone with authority. Not entirely sure what she'd make of me today. But the truth is, we have come a long way. But as we've heard this morning, the truth is we still have a long way to go. Almost 100 years ago, again we heard earlier, in 1918, we elected the first woman to Westminster. But where are the political leaders today? Where are the female leaders of our political parties today? I spent the last 7 years in Scotland, a country with many cultural, historical, linguistic, and demographic similarities to Ireland. Yet Scotland is led by a female First Minister. Her cabinet is 50% female, and the leaders of the two main opposition parties, the Conservatives and Labour in Scotland, are female. Where are the Irish counterparts? Women have been participating in university education at mass levels for over 40 years in Ireland. 50% of academic staff in Irish higher education are women. But as we heard from Breen earlier, where are they at the top? Where are the female leaders of Irish universities? Women participate in business across the sector and across the country. Just look around this room. But where are the women in the corner offices? Where are the female CEOs? We heard earlier that it's between 5 and 6%. Where are the women in the boardrooms? 10% in Ireland against an EU average of 18%. And when have we ever been happy with being less than the EU average? So how do we get from where we are to where we want to be? We won't get there by wishing it were different. We won't get there by complaining. On a personal level, we'll get there by hard work, by making constant, costly trade-offs, and by supporting one another. On a societal level, we will get there only by concerted effort and systemic public policy. And no policy is more important than the provision of high-quality, affordable childcare and first-rate early education. Bearing and raising and educating the next generation is the ultimate public good. Without it, our society cannot continue. So how can we continue to allow one segment of our society to bear a disproportionate cost of providing that public good? We hear a lot about the gender pay gap. We hear about it across professions and at different ends of the socioeconomic spectrum. In Ireland, according to the EU Commission, the gender pay gap is 14%. But this figure conceals some crucial details. For the bottom 10% of earners, the gender pay gap in Ireland is 4%. But for the top 10% of income earners, the gender pay gap is 25%, reflecting the paucity of women at the top. But most revealing is the high cost of motherhood. OECD figures show that for Irish women without children, the pay gap is minus 17%. But for women with at least one child, this jumps to 31 percentage points to 14%. Until we devise enlightened public policy and career planning paths that share the costs of child raising more equitably, we are not going to eliminate the gender pay gap, and we're not going to eliminate gender inequality. I'm sure, like every woman in this room, I know I have many, many stories of the challenges of combining childcare and a career. One of my favorites was one time attending the American Political Science Association meeting which was a requirement for aspiring young academics in America. I had my 6-week-old and my 2-year-old with me. And we were in a Hilton in Washington, D.C., which had about 57 floors. And I was waiting to get into an elevator with a briefcase in one hand, a 6-week-old in my arm, and a 2-year-old beside me. And the elevator door opened, and the 2-year-old ran in, and before I could move, the door shut. So I eventually found a security phone and called and asked for help, and they said they couldn't stop the elevator, but they would get a security guard onto the elevator to make sure no one took off with my 2-year-old. So the elevator went all 35 floors up and 35 floors back. It felt like half an hour, and when the door opened and packed with people and this tiny little screaming 2-year-old. So as I grabbed her and held on to her, I was accosted by the people on the lift who surrounded me by saying, "What kind of mother are you? She's too young to be left alone traveling on an elevator." And as I stood there with the screaming 2-year-old, a screaming 6-week-old, and I looked at them and said, "Do you think I planned it this way?" And I used to drive into work knowing that I had left a sick child at school with a lecture of mind over matter, hoping that the school wouldn't call until I'd at least gotten into the lecture room so that I would be able to give the lecture. And realizing that I was paying more in childcare than I was bringing home after taxes as a professor or junior professor then at Harvard. And I thought, I'm actually paying somebody so I can live like this? And I also remember having a child in the Harvard University daycare, and the daycare ended at 5 o'clock, but all our department meetings went from 4 to 6. So I used to slip out at 5 o'clock, as if going to a restroom, run at breakneck speed over to the childcare center, drag my child, run back, walk professionally back into the room, deposit my child under the table, and continue with the meeting. And I did this for a year and a half. And people would turn to me and say, "Well, Louise, what do you think of point 6, subsection B?" And I would be vaguely aware of the fact that that particular subsection was under the table being eaten by my child. And I would try to respond like the professional I was. But in that 18 months, nobody ever acknowledged why I had left the room or what I had done when I came back, or the fact that there was a child under the table. So my lesson in all of that is one has to keep one's sense of humor, but also that it shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't be this hard to combine a career and a family. And I certainly respect any woman who makes a different choice than the choice I made by staying at home to mind their children. But for the women who choose to combine a career and a family, we as a society owe them more help, I think, than we currently give them. So the pace of change is slower than many of us who were educated in the 60s, 70s, and 80s would like. We look around us and we see the professions continue to be shaped like a pyramid where the higher you go, the fewer women you find. And yet there are grounds for optimism. Change is occurring, and the pace of change is accelerating. Indeed, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, cultural shifts in Irish society over the past 50 years has been the changing role of women, from supportive wife, mother, and sister to creative engagement in the workforce. In some fields, the change has been really dramatic. In 2014, there were more women practicing solicitors in Ireland than men. This has been a dramatic change in the past century. In 1921, we had our first female barristers. 1923, our first female solicitor. 1925, first female law professor. 1963, first female judge. 1980, first female High Court judge. 1993, our first Supreme Court judge and First Minister for Justice. 2011, the first Chief Justice to be a woman, the first female Attorney General, and the first Director of Public Prosecutions. And in 2014, the first Garda Commissioner, whom we heard this morning. So in the legal and criminal justice system, the pace of change is indeed accelerating. But what about the other spheres? On the surface, we've done very well. Ireland has produced two extraordinary female presidents, Mary Robinson and Mary McAleese, both products of the legal profession. They are admired the world over for their talent, commitment to causes beyond themselves and beyond these shores, and they are a model for us all. I attribute my own liberation to growing up in a family of 7 children with 3 brothers and 3 sisters. I knew from the beginning that the myth of male superiority was just that, a myth. I remember being taught home economics by the nuns, and we started out ironing men's cotton handkerchiefs and graduated to ironing men's shirts, and with a constant invocation of the horrors of creases in men's collars. And I remember getting into trouble when I declared that I would never marry a man who'd expect me to iron his shirts, and I haven't. And I look around today, we see highly educated young women, a highly educated woman close to winning the nomination of her party to be the Democratic president in the United States. We see a woman who has any number of qualifications for her job, whatever one thinks of her politics, whether one likes them or not. No one can deny that she is vastly more qualified than any of her opponents running for office in America. Now, recently, during the New Hampshire primary, the first female Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, got into trouble by saying there's a special place in hell for women who don't support women. Now, the young female supporters of Bernie Sanders were outraged that they should vote for a woman because she was a woman. And Clinton certainly said no, she wasn't asking for any support. She was fighting for women to be able to make a choice, for women to have the choice. She wanted women's votes because of her qualifications, not because of her gender. But the truth is, of course, that Madeleine Albright has been saying the same sentence for at least 20 years. I know because I've been quoting her for at least 10 of those years. Successful women should indeed support other women, and a great many do. And young women and young men must see that leaders come in all shapes and sizes, in both genders, all colors, and indeed all nationalities. Gone are the days that for a woman to succeed, she must become more male than the men around her. Successful leadership requires a complex mix of skills, of experience, and of attributes. And women I believe, are at least as likely to have these as men. Though double standards remain, women are expected to look good, to dress well, preferably in heels, while exercising all of these skills. So I don't accept the crude generalizations about male and female qualities. The world is more complex and nuanced. I've studied terrorism for much of my career, so I've studied female terrorists in particular, and you'll be happy to know that women are indeed underrepresented in terrorist groups. But where there are women terrorists, there's only ever been one terrorist group led by a woman, the Japanese Red Army, and a very, very brutal woman she was too. And there have been many highly competent female terrorists. One of my favorites being a woman called Maria Kagel, who it was only when her husband was in prison that she took over the movement, and the movement did spectacularly well. She then made the mistake of springing him from prison, and things went downhill for the movement then. But we shouldn't kid ourselves into believing that women are necessarily the kinder, gentler sex. We see this today with the French and British women volunteering for brutal enforcement squads run by ISIS. We also see it in the women who have volunteered for suicide terrorism, terrorists the world over, religious groups, not secular groups, and so on. The one characteristic that I have found and have been able to verify quantitatively among women terrorists, however, is that they are more loyal than their male counterparts. When the Italian government offered incentives for defection to members of the Red Brigades, men turned in their comrades at 5 times the rate of women. So make of that what you will. When we worry that the pace of change isn't fast enough, that we're not where we want to be, and both of those is true, but I like to think of women in other parts of the world and just think how lucky we are that we don't have to worry about malnutrition or female genital mutilation or systemic rape. Think how much easier we have had it because of the work of our mothers and our grandmothers, and think how much we owe to the women who've gone before us, and treasure what we have achieved. I think our grandmothers would be proud of us, and the onus on us is to ensure that our daughters and our granddaughters will be proud of us. So let's fix it so that our daughters don't have to be the first female anything. Let's fix it so that your daughter can succeed mine in a job without anybody remarking on the fact. Let's fix it so that your daughters and mine can compete for the top jobs in any profession and be judged not by their looks, but only by their qualifications. Events like today, I believe, will bring that day closer. And it'll happen closer if we all work together to get there. And we'll have a better time if we enjoy the task. And I trust we will. Thank you very much.